I think we're going to go and get started if that's okay. I know that you guys are going to have questions. We want to keep this really kind of uh, uh, pretty casual. We're going to go over the concepts and then we'll save plenty of time for you guys to have questions. Our goal for this is to kind of introduce our thinking behind the Nine Natives program, to take any kind of questions that you guys have, and also to make it available after the recording, available to all the impact chapters, master naturalist chapters, and other folks, and probably the native plant chapters throughout the state. So if they want to embark on a Nine Natives project or scoping, they can as well. And Lan Shen was not able to make it for a very good reason, but Beth and I are going to go ahead and handle this presentation. And so we're going to go ahead and just introduce ourselves real quick. Like I said, Lan Shen is not here, but I will tell you just real quickly that Lan has been involved in the Nine Natives program since the very first meeting. She has a lot of native plant knowledge. She helped organize the first design contest and has played a really important role in getting this out in the community. So she can't be here, but she is a stalwart in our local prairie community and continues to do wonderful things. So I will just tell you real quickly about myself, and then, or actually, Beth, why don't you go ahead and tell folks about what's bringing you to this work? Oop, you're on mute.
Oh, I muted myself so that you wouldn't have any feedback. So I am a landscape architect. I was with Clark Condon Associates for a total of like 30 years. And I sort of retired last December. Now I'm still doing a fair amount of work, but all nonprofit and all pro bono. Have a couple of projects with Clark Condon still going on. So I got into this, I don't know, I started sort of researching and getting involved and doing prairie seminars, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And then we did some prairie restoration for developers, and I've been involved with just different groups for different things. Have an interest in prairie plants and native plants and all of that. So, and I guess my role in the Nine Natives is to sort of lend that design aspect to it, because as I discussed it, you can't just pick some plants and put them out there. If you're going to sort of make a successful program, you want it to also have an aesthetic appeal.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just tell you quickly about what I do for the Nature Conservancy. So I'm the Houston Healthy Cities Director, and my job is to work with wonderful landscape architects like Beth and the community, decision makers, a whole bunch of people to rebuild nature in the city and the region for many different reasons. As we rebuild nature into neighborhoods like the Gulfton neighborhood here in Houston that doesn't have a lot of nature, what we're looking to do is find easy to replicate palettes that are durable, replicable, and sourceable. And so one of the things, as we established the Nine Native program years and years ago through a design competition that we'll talk about, one of our lines of thinking was that many native species lists are not available. And so not only are they not available, the species on that list, but it doesn't tell you how to pair the wine and the cheese. So what combinations of species work really well together? So let's get into that, and let's talk about kind of the setup of this. Beth is going to talk about the design characteristics and how everything kind of fits together. And then we'll both handle the how have we kind of brought this to the community and where is it finding receptivity. So what's the big idea? The big idea is to create a simple program, something that's legible and easy for people to understand, to better educate and activate communities to use native plants in their home gardens, corporate landscapes, and public spaces for a variety of benefits. So it's not just obviously that they're beautiful. It's not just that they're really great for pollinators, which they are, and a variety of birds and other things. It's that they have climate adaptation and resilience. They connect to place. So, what Beth and I talk about is like taking it deep. like how many benefits can you stack in one place? And with native plants, right, you can stack a lot of different benefits. So it is both aesthetic and highly functional. So we can add, plants to our gardens and increase resilience and provide better access to nature. So as I work in the city to bring nature for climate adaptation, for instance, I want things that feed things, wildlife, and I want things that in neighborhoods where there's not a lot of nature equity gives people their best shot at interacting with really cool nature. But I also want stuff that can survive repeated floods and droughts and other things and heat that we're dealing with right now, and that are forecasted to be durable into the near future as our city continues to warm. This is true of most parts of Texas suffering from water scarcity, flash flooding, those kinds of things. And these plants tend to be super, as you know, super durable and super resilient. Here in Houston, we've had 500-year floods or more since 2015. So that's like an every year flood. So many of these species, as I've worked in parks, in some of our signature parks, some of these plantings have been underwater for a week or two. Not the 9 natives, but just native coastal prairie plants, and a lot of them survive. So they're very, very tough, and that's a great characteristic, right? So we're trying to not only pick the right species, but make sure the species that we pick are not fragile. They're kind of bulletproof in some ways. One thing that we use native plants here to do, right, is to draw a sense of history, to make connectedness to our indigenous history here. And a lot of these are ethnobotanical, right? So they have medicinal characteristics, they had food characteristics. So we have not all the space in the world to work in the city and in suburbs. So we want to make sure, like I said, that they have multiple benefits. Here in Houston, what we're basing this all on is our local ecology. A lot of people don't know that Houston was a prairie city originally. We were just about completely encompassed in what is called the coastal prairie, which was a huge biome that stretched from Louisiana and actually down into Mexico. It was so big, 9 million acres, that it's actually bigger than, if taken individually, our smallest 8 states in the United States. It's a huge biome. A lot of people don't know about it, though, and that's part of the story. Here in Houston, we, because of folks like Beth and Lan and Katy Prairie Conservancy and TNC and other groups, we have a whole constellation of pocket prairies in this town. We probably have more than 50 at this point, and I can share a map for those as we get into the program. Well, part of the reason for having all those pocket prairies throughout the city was public acceptance and socialization of the idea of what a prairie is, right? And that really wasn't there even 5 or 6 years ago. It's really gained a lot of attention. Katy Prairie Conservancy, when I was there, we established what's called the Prairie Builders Parks and Schools program to intentionally work with folks like Beth and others to put pocket prairies in. So 9 natives, in my mind, for the sunny version, is a little bit simplified version of a pocket prairie planting. Verify species native range. So one of our characteristics, right, is we want to do everything that's locally appropriate genetically, right? So we don't want to necessarily plant stuff from Central Texas. Frankly, it's so wet here that they rot and they are not persistent. And we don't want to plant something too far north because they have weird bloom cycles. So we want to stay close to home. And so what we had a need. And that need was, let's come up with simplified plantings that are legible from a landscape architecture perspective. So they're readable, they're sourceable, they provide lots and lots of benefits, and it's got a catchy name. So we actually thought about 10 species at first, and then we drew it down to 9 because it would be more easy for people to incorporate. But also we needed some, just frankly, there's a lot of power in words. So we also discussed with Beth, Diana Foss, who's our local urban biologist, and other people that were on the scoring committee, Thomas Adams, who's with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, what's the minimum number of viable plants to do something? And the answer varied. But we settled on 9 because that was doable. And if people already had a tree or shrub or something to build around, it's even fewer. So we kicked this off by asking our community, and this was done by Coastal Prairie Partnership, which is winding down now, but we did a lot of work to kind of connect the prairie community. Now Katy Prairie Conservancy is taking a lot of that with Nature Conservancy Association of Texas, kind of taking the mantle of collaborative prairie conservation, which is great. So we had KPC, Coastal Prairie Partnership, and the Native Prairie Association of Texas. And we decided to kick this off, not just by coming up with our own list, but asking people to come up with designs. So the goal was to choose 9 natives that coordinated well with a few alternates. And then we started with about 53 species, if I remember correctly. And we started off with about, I think, Beth, we started with 5 judges. So we had plant experts and landscape architecture experts. And we gave people kind of boundaries, 11 by 20 rectangular bed, because it's kind of a common size. And then they submitted their drawings for judging. And then the winners were announced back on May 22nd, back in 2013, I think, something like that. And so that kind of got people's creative juices working. And that 53 species list, we had to pair, they had to pare them down to an appropriate 9 species list that would, and the species had to work well together. So the design challenge was run for, maybe we ran it for a month or 2. And the goal was to plant 9 natives. And here's one of the things that we stipulated from the beginning and part of the scoring criteria. If it wasn't available commercially, you got dinged really hard. Because part of it is, can a regular human being actually plant this? Because we started to get these comments of, well, my grandmother's dog's friend in Alabama knows of some species in the middle of a bar ditch down in Angleton, and I could maybe get, no. We were like, that's not the point of this. The point is to use what we can get smartly. So you did get dinged for that. Why 9? Enough to make a difference, but it's not overwhelming. So sometimes what happens is, when you give out native plant species lists and it's like 200, it's like too crazy. And people are overwhelmed and they just put it aside and they said, this is not helpful. So we wanted to make a difference, but not make it so simple that it's like 2 species, because you could do that on your own. Create replicable, available designs, absolutely. So there are different, and Beth and her team did an amazing job, the Mary Keelers did an amazing job of putting these designs into context that you would find in the city, medians, backyards, that kind of thing. We launched it on March 21st, 2013, and it was designated the 9 Natives Challenge. And actually, I remember when we came up with the term 9 Natives, actually, this was my wife at the kitchen table. And I was saying, well, we want to do this thing. She's like, oh, 9 natives. I'm like, oh my God, that's it. So I was excited that it had a name and it had a presence, but we needed judges. And so we had Thomas Adams, who's an amazing botanist, Scott Barnes, who does a lot of landscape work, obviously Beth Clark, Diana Foss, and Flo Hanna, who's no longer with us, but was an amazing prairie champion here in Houston. And here were the criteria: aesthetics. It's got to look nice and have visual appeal throughout the year, right? So it's not going to have it into like January, February, but there are even things down here that bloom into December. Adaptability. So plants had to be adapted for local moisture, full sun, and climate. We knew that we were going to get to a shady and semi-shady design later on, which we have now gotten to because Beth really bulldogged that one, which is great. But the first one was like full sun, climate and local moisture. And so local moisture is a kicker, because local moisture around here can mean anything from 30 inches to like drought, right? So what we tried to do is pick species that were plastic. They could handle a lot of water or less water. We didn't want those specialists that were very, very dry. They liked very, very dry feet or super wet feet all the time. We tried to get species that could handle a little bit of both. Availability, like I said, easy to germinate seeds, or you could get plants for the nursery trade real easily. Sustainability, and this is what I was talking about being bulletproof. So you got scored on, from our knowledge of plant usage, whether or not this thing was going to hang around. We know that there's some native species you plant, they'll hang around for a year or 2, but they're real tricky and they die. A good example of that is dogwood. Like, I don't know if anybody that gets dogwood to like stick forever, maybe somebody does, but just get real case specific. So we wanted things that literally, in many cases, that we have transplanted from the middle of the summer in a rescue and thrown in a pot of dirt and it lives, right? We wanted the zombie plants that could like survive anything, right? And then compatibility. So it had to fit within a construct that said you just don't plant whatever. Now we have done some pocket prairies where we've given the full reign to plant whatever we want. That's not usual. So we needed it to look like something and we needed it to be readable. So the design questions, and we had a rubric that we actually literally went through and scored all these with. Does the planting host different types of wildlife? So if it birds, different kinds of pollinators, not a generalized category, but we actually tried to work it down to almost the species level. Like, is it going to feed lots of different kinds of things? Collectively, does the design have a long bloom cycle? So some of the early designs we saw were super heavy on spring flowers, and then it was going to create a lot of dead head and dead spaces throughout the rest of the year. So the design didn't really hold together, like from a seasonal standpoint. Are the species readily available, and do they meet those kind of like, appropriate to gardens, neighborhood landscapes, medians, that kind of thing? So we ended up getting these designs, and people got real creative. Some of the designs were really excellent. And one of the things that we were judging here, and Beth can talk a lot more about this, is does it have the proper structure? So if you put a lot of tiny plants in the middle, and then you got these giant grasses on the sides, or if you don't have any grasses and it falls apart because there are too many flowers and not enough structure, that didn't work real well. And we did guide people about that. We said, like, it needs to look like something throughout the year, and you can't have a lot of dead spots in this because the general public is not going to really dig that too much. And here's another one. We ended up getting a lot of designs that had these clouds of species. Some more appropriate than others. And we didn't tell them, like, work from this 15 species list. We let them pare it down. And then we took all of those results and we started to pare it down to something actionable. So Beth, you want to take over from here? You're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. So I have to share my screen.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
All right.
Now I've got to, sorry guys, where do I find share screen?
It's at the bottom. Yeah, you got it. There you go.
Oh, you've disabled participant screen sharing, Jaime.
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that for you. Let me let you. There we go. You should be able to do it now.
Okay. Here we go. Okay. Let's see from the current slide. Let's go from the beginning. Okay. Okay, I'm going to click through this here. Y'all can hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I will tell you the challenge was to get to 9. And in all honesty, full of disclosure, we didn't get to 9. We got to 9 and some alternates, and we did the same thing on the shade. So one of the things that, we started out with this, they were like, oh, we can do seed. And I said, mostly we when you plant a garden, you don't want to wait, months and months for the seed to come up, and you don't know, what's going to come up and what's not. So we said, okay, well, let's start with most of the plants being something we can get commercially. Now we can argue about the fact that the Salvia coccinea that you find in the nursery trade may or may not be the true genotype. The Muhlenbergia capillaris, the Gulf Muhly that you get in the trade is probably the Florida one, which because you get the Florida one, y'all may know all of this. The Florida, for some reason, the genotype in Florida has the seed germinates more readily than the one here. And so all of the trade is, when you buy Gulf Muhly in the trade, you're getting the Florida one. So, and then I think y'all probably know little blue stem genotype differs from East Texas to South Texas to whatever. So we made a point. So we said, again, this is the review of the criteria for species. We started out with this long list. Land did this really great, like what's the bloom chart thing. And we started out with this and said, okay, well, we can't get brown seed paspalum as a plant. We can't get long spike tridents. What can we actually get? And so we ended up with, this is our final list here. And again, it was it was lists and lists, and it was, okay, let's pick a forb and a grass, and let's pick some evergreen, some, we're okay with some deciduous. So we ended up with bluebonnet. We did borrow, bluebonnets really aren't native here until you get like to the west edge of Houston, but everybody thinks that bluebonnets are native all over. And so we said, well, that was sort of a public perception thing of what is a native. And to get buy-in, we said, well, we're going to fudge that a little bit. Little blue stem, of course, it's a nice grass. Gulf Muley's a nice grass. Rattlesnake master, we thought would be a really interesting thing to put in the garden to give us some texture. Spiderwort, I don't know how many spiderworts are in Texas, but there are a number of spiderworts, in the trade. And so we did have spiderwort in there because it is pretty much an evergreen. Indian blanket seeds readily. Black-eyed Susan, you can get in the trade. A lot of times you get cultivars, but it also seeds fairly readily. Monarda also generally you can find in the trade, and it seeds. And because they seed fairly readily, then you get people like Josh Growers outside of Georgetown, and Morningstar Prairie Plants down in south of Houston. You get those people are going to grow them out because they do seed readily. And again, the Salvia coccinea. So again, these things are either available or they seed readily enough that we knew we could get somebody to grow them out. So we put together this brochure. So it was Clark Condon, Katy Prairie Conservancy, Central Prairie Partnership, and the Native Prairies Association of Texas Houston chapter. And so Clark Condon and I had a number of younger LAs in there who worked with me on this that are more graphic than I am in terms of manipulating these programs. So in the introduction, we say that, we say the reason for it, and talk about the different genotypes, talk about, not doing a monoculture and that sort of thing. And I assume that since you guys are on this presentation that you all have looked at this and read this. So I'm going to click through this pretty quickly. And I'll just give you start with just one. So we had two sources. We used wildflower.org for a lot of the, and then some university sites for the technical information. And we used, we used wildflower.org allows you to use their photography if you give credit. And then we had some different photographers that allowed us to use their photography. So I tried to credit all the photography, and then in the end, I had a bibliography that credited all the sources that we used that I remember. So again, we had growth habit, wildlife value, ethnobotanical value. Why was the plant selected? So like Black-eyed Susan was selected for its showy bright yellow color and coarse textured foliage. It's native throughout much of the U.S. and wildly naturalized elsewhere. So again, this is a plant that everybody knows and they're familiar with, and so we wanted some things that everybody was so familiar with that there's really an acceptability to it. And then we couldn't, it's like, okay, we got 9, but maybe we want a few more. And so we have some alternates. So the alternate was Texas coneflower. There's the Gulf Muley, little blue stem, spiderwort, rattlesnake master. And again, the purpose of this is not to create a prairie. And we had a lot of discussion about that. It's like, oh, that's not a prairie. Well, no, it's not meant to be a prairie. It's meant to be a garden, really more of a garden using natives, a prairie garden versus a prairie. So again, scarlet sage, bluebonnet, and then we had our alternates, the Salvia azurei, the partridge pea, Prairie verbena, Texas coneflower. So that was just like, well, there's 4 more that we just like, they didn't quite make the cut for 9, but they just seemed like really significant species that would be a good alternative if you can't find this or if you like a particular plant. And then again, what we tried to do on each of these is like for rattlesnake master, we've got these species, and for scarlet sage, we've got, the others. So we tried to sort of give, I think, Jaime, you found a lot of this photography for me on this one. So that was that one. We also have, and I don't think we used it on this, but the Clark Condon has a license to use Adobe stock. as long as we're not selling it. So, so I think in the shade one, we actually have used some Adobe stock photos. I'm not sure. We did acres of prairie in a development on the north side of Houston called Springwoods. And we just put this in here to say, okay, if you want to do a prairie, do you want to do a prairie type planting? Here's a demonstration area. I think the phase one of this project was 25 acres. And it's, all the medians and rights of way of this development. So we just showed ground prep, we seeded, then we planted, and then you can see 18 to 24 months after that. So this is just an example of a native prairie planting. And then we worked with Trees for Houston. Trees for Houston is a group out of Houston that their main goal is to plant, their mission is to plant trees, but their executive director, Barry Ward, is very broad-minded. And he said, look, we're not just going to plant trees. He said, I've got, he said, we're doing these medians. We can get people to plant native plants. I have the capacity, in between tree rows, we could do some plant propagation for you and for the community. And so he said, but I really want a demonstration of some medians on how we could use native plants in a median. And so Clark Condon, again, some of the ones in the office work with me, and we said, okay, well, let's sort of take these 9 natives and show how you use them in a median, in sort of an informal setting, and with the trees sort of random, and then again in sort of a more formal way. And keeping in mind that for medians, you have to be 75 feet back from the nose of the tree, and you have to look at your heights and all that kind of thing. So by those requirements, the taller plants are in the middle, and we have lower plants on the ends. So so that's those 2 medians, and again, y'all can take a look at those. And then we also did a little layout for what do you do? Can y'all see? Maybe I should hide that. We also did a layout for sort of a typical backyard. So if you wanted to sort of plant just sort of something very simple and structured, if you wanted something a little more random. And in part of this, we said, okay, well, as a companion plant, you might have some southern wax myrtle. You might have, something like, I showed cedar elm. I think in most typical backyards, live oaks are too big for a backyard planting. I think cedar elm was kind of one of my go-to trees because it likes wet, it likes dry, it tends to grow sort of more upright than it does spread. And to me, it's a great, great sort of backyard tree that's native. And so we did some layouts of those, some ideas for design for the 9 natives. And then here you see we had a page on sources for seed and sources for plants. And these are obviously for the Houston area. And then the different references of what we used for some of the information, just because I felt like it was, legitimately to put those references in there. So we did this in 2000. When did we publish this, Jaime? About 14 or 15?
Probably about 14,
something like
2014.
that. Yeah, so this kind of worked. And then we sort of languished. Then we talked about a couple of years ago, we talked about the shade, and we talked about the shade, and finally it was like, okay, we have to make this happen. So then it was like, okay, what do we do? What do we plant in the shade? And, we all have our favorites, and a lot of these, pigeonberry and all these different things, they're available in the trade. And so I did a presentation from the Shady 9, and I think we had almost 100 people, like 70 or 80 or 90 people, join that meeting. And, I went through, I can't remember how many plants, we had, but we talked about, we talked about fern and forbs and grasses, and just kind of went through a bunch of different plants. And I said, okay, everybody send me your list. Well, Doris Hurd sent me a long list, which was great. I got lists of, we got lists of plants that were, full sun. I'm like, do y'all remember? You remember the assignment, right? If y'all watch TikTok, I understood the assignment. If y'all ever watch TikTok, they didn't understand the assignment. So we went through this and more and more. This was 2020, and we narrowed it down and narrowed it down and narrowed it down. And then Lynn and I had a lot of discussion about, about some of the plants, particularly coralberry, because remember, we're talking about somebody's backyard. We're not talking about a big commercial project, but we're talking about potentially a small backyard. And so, we have a number of plants that, sort of are fairly aggressive. So we had to think about, about what that was. And so we narrowed it down and narrowed it down. And then I think we were pretty close. My goal was to get it out by the end of the year. And of course, the pandemic hit and all that. And then I retired in December. And so in January, I thought, okay, I am going to make this happen. And so I think I spent most of January. We had most of the stuff written, but then we wanted to find the photography. And luckily we had a number of, people. A good friend of mine does a lot of wildlife photography, and I think Chuck DuPlant. And then we used some from the wildlife.org and all. So Lauren Simpson is an attorney here who's a great wildlife and great in terms of pollinators. She spoke to our Prairie Association meeting this year. She has amazing grasp of wildlife and what they need. So this photograph was her. So I think I spent most of January looking for photography. And then by the end of January, February or so, we pretty much had it together. So we ended up with, Cherokee sedge, blue-eyed grass, which is that's a great little grass and available in the trade. Both of these, Josh Growers grows a number of different sedges. If y'all know Josh Growers up in Georgetown, not all of them are native. A number of them are native to California, but he grows Cherokee sedge and he grows Texas sedge. And then I've gotten blue-eyed grass from him, and also from Tree Search Farms in up in the north side of Houston. So again, some great photography. I just, it was really fun sort of finding all the different photography, and I think it was Chuck DuPlant was really good about saying, oh yes, that butterfly is really not right here. So we did a lot of work on this one, on getting the photography right. Inland sea oats, again, pretty much available in the trade. Mist flower, of course, is pigeonberry, heartleaf skullcap, and pretty much all of these, I think we can get plants. Christmas fern. So again, we were looking for a clumping fern, not a running fern. If y'all know the difference, a running fern sort of goes everywhere, like some of the sword ferns and the drawing a blank. Oh, it's in here. And, so beautyberry.
Southern wood fern.
Yeah, the wood fern. Thank you. I was struggling for that name. So the wood fern and Turk's cap. And then again, we couldn't settle with just 9. We had to sort of do a few more. So we looked at, phlox, and of course, you get things in the shade. Do you have full shade or do you have dappled shade? And that was really a conundrum, because you're kind of like, okay, what is our situation? So if you have dappled shade, the coreopsis will grow on the edge of the woods, and the phlox, I have phlox, and it gets like late afternoon sun. And some things grow really well. They don't bloom well, but they grow well. Like I have flame acanthus, because I'm on about 2.5 acres, and I have quite a bit of shade because I have big live oaks. So I struggle for plants. I have flame leaf acanthus. It doesn't bloom real well, but it makes it gives nice structure to the garden, because it's hard to get sort of woody things that are in the shade. So anyway, so then we said, okay, well, what if you have sort of a woodland garden? What if you have more room in your garden? I have more room in my garden. I can let things run around. But if you have a typical backyard, you don't want something that's going to like go everywhere. So so the wood fern is a great shade plant, but again, not great for a small property unless you just really want to cover it with fern. Virginia wild rye is kind of a quirky little thing, I think, for a backyard, but it might be good if you have some, frostweed will just take over. We planted this in the botanic garden in this last year, and if you have a chance to go to the Houston Botanic Garden, it's like 5 feet tall. So of course, we don't necessarily get the freeze here that we need to sort of see that frost comes out. Coralberry, Lan and I had a lot of discussion about this, because it does go by underground runners, and it's like, I'm like, Lan, I don't know about putting that in an urban garden. but it's just such a really great plant. We just couldn't leave it out. So we were sort of struggling with that. And then the last one, we were looking for a shrub that would, give us some background besides southern wax myrtle. What else can we sort of plant in the shade? And so we were looking at southern arrowwood. There's a number of different cultivars in the trade. It's not evergreen, but it seemed like a good one to include because it does have some good wildlife value. So those were our ones for the shade. Here's a great photography. We have a friend who has CC Parker has about 30 acres, and she has quite a wildlife refuge, and she's done some great photography. And a lot of this is, again the photography I thought was just really sort of fun to gather. And so then we looked at again some layouts for those non-natives for shade, and we need if you're going to plant this garden, you have to already have some shade, right? And so we were showing the trees here, and I just put existing shade tree because whatever they've got is what they're going to work with, right? And then just reference this area here as a non-natives for sun. So again, just to kind of give people an idea of how they might create a more formal garden versus a more informal garden. And again, obviously, because this is a lot, you have the taller things in the back and the shorter things in the front, and trying to drop some evergreen in and kind of work with the evergreens and the perennials and try to work with the color and sort of repeat the color. And if you ever think about this, I think about it like some of the English perennial borders that you see, where they sort of repeat sizes and textures and colors and all. So anyway, so again, the sources on that, and then again, the references, we sort of did a lot of research on this, trying to get the right sort of data for the plants. And so that was how we put that together and finally got it out and about. And then this is sort of how different people, so the idea, and I think Jaime's idea on this in the very beginning, was this is in the public realm. This is for anybody to use. And so Katy Prairie has taken this, and they put together these two, and this is just one page. They put together this little fold over 8.5 by 11 brochure, to a simple way to talk about these plants. And they did this non-natives for sun, and they did the non-natives for shade. And again, it's just a little fold over brochure that they can hand out. And then they also did two videos. They did a video on what the non-natives are, and they did a video on, and I worked with them a little bit on the script on this, on how to plant a non-natives garden. And these are real quick, like 3-minute videos, very, very simplified. And you can find that on katyprairie.org. Hang on just a minute. Get my phone off. So anyway, so again, if y'all haven't seen those videos, they're a great little video to watch. And then the Garden Club of Houston did some grow outs. I think they worked with, Jaime, you tell me, they worked with Audubon and I don't know who else they work with. Anyway, they grew out these non-native plants, and then they had this they have a bulb mart every year, and it's just open to the community, and they grew out these non-natives, and I think in a tray you got one of each or something. So that was really supported by the Garden Club of Houston. And then we did a demonstration garden at the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences. And Lynn was very instrumental in this. And these are her slides. I'm sorry she's not here. But Katy Prairie Conservancy had the idea and got a grant application. And they work with the Museum of Natural Science Cockrell Butterfly Center, if you've ever been there. And the Garden Club of Houston did some funding on this as well, and Memorial Park Conservancy. So it was a real community effort. And then we found the plants, we found the soil. They had a lot of different volunteers. On the day that this was planted, we had people stop by on the street, go, oh, I'll help. It was really fun. So we Clark Condon did a design for this. We took out, I think there was a palm in here or something like that we took out. So we did a design using these, 9 natives. And then on the day, we went out, this is one of the Museum of Natural Sciences staff. And so we painted it all out, and then they delivered all the plants, and Land did all the work on getting these plants, collecting them from different people, buying them and whatever. And so we laid all these plants out just in their spots. And then I think we did this the day before, 2 days before, and then the morning, several volunteers came early, and we all got these plants laid out in their spots. And then the Army came, and it was really fun. It was very, very well attended, and a very enthusiastic group of people. So I think the goal of this was really to get the community involved, was really important. And so here you see it. Here you see it planted, and you can see the background of the museum there. And there you see it. There you see it sort of growing, starting to grow. And then here is a later picture. Land, and they have the Museum of Natural Sciences staff maintains this. They have a work day once every month. And then Lan and her mom go, I think every Monday, Jaime, do you remember? But they go.
I don't remember how often.
Yeah, they've done a lot of the maintenance on this as well. So anyway.
And Lan's a docent at the museum, so that's part of her
she is a
connection.
docent at the museum. Oh, I didn't know that. So, okay, and I finished up with this, and I guess we're going to give you, give this thing out. So this is where you find the 9 Natives PDF, Katy Prairie, Native Prairie Association, and Clark Condon. You can find it on, you can get it through any of the websites if you search for it. So that's it. That's the way we did it.
Yeah. That was excellent, Beth. Thank you so much. Can I just add a couple of points, which I think bear kind of emphasis. One is this is an open source concept, and all the groups that participated in the beginning said that nobody's going to really own the concept. Now, you'll own the products that you make, or, and take pride in that, yes, but nobody owns the 9 Natives concept, right? It's open source. And so people can take it and remix it however they want to, right? The second thing is that in terms of maintenance, one thing that I'm hopeful for is I bring 9 Natives plantings to neighborhoods, is that the maintenance might be a little easier, because when you plant a whole prairie, you have to have somebody there that knows all the plants. So it may be 50, 60 species. But if you can put together a binder of 9 plants and say, if it's not this, pull it, that might make the maintenance easier. One of the 2 other quick points. One is that I am looking to actually do this in a community, maybe on a median. So we'll just keep you updated. And one thing that you may want to check with, if you're not already doing this, is there has been some appetite for Centerpoint Energy, which is our energy deliverer. And they're the folks that need to maintain all these power lines. And we have lots of down trees like you guys do. And so they're looking for planting pallets, right, that go under power lines that don't interfere with the power line and knock out power. So I don't know where those conversations have gone, but there was some early interest from them in helping to promote this to avoid having to cut down trees that are not in the right place. So there might even be some funding associated with this wherever you are. So anyway, what we needed to do was make it real. Garden Club of Houston, they just took it, they ran, they sell all these flats every year. The museum garden looks great. The materials that Katy Prairie Conservancy put together are awesome. The videos are very good. I suggest those. And, and to Beth's point, I think anytime you can make community conservation happen and make it legible and readable and all that stuff, it's great. So with that, we have some time for you guys to ask questions, to talk to one another, and we will just ask you guys, we aren't a huge group, just to unmic yourself if you have a question, a comment, or want to discuss anything.
Hey, Jaime and Beth, can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I just posted it in the chat. And Beth, I think you kind of hit on it a little bit, but I'm kind of curious about the restrictions of those native plants and their commercial availability. So I get, as I'm sure all of us get, I want to convert to natives, but I don't know where to get them. So how much did you work with just the restriction of what is already currently available versus the enticement of growers and say, hey, would you be willing to try this in your repertoire of plants that you sell? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so some of these things, I'll go back to the sun thing since that's a deal. I was trying to get everybody's face up again, but I've lost it and I can't figure out how to get it. So some of these things are like I'm like, okay, guys, that doesn't exist, because I mean, we've used a lot of natives in different projects that we've done, and we've worked like that that Springwoods project. We had a had a contractor, Josh Growers, and in Georgetown, and grew out a number of things for us that we knew that wouldn't seed readily, and so the contractor was able to sort of tie up things and get things contract grown in advance. But some of the stuff, it was like, okay, nobody will ever grow that. It's hard to grow. It's, whatever. And so, just, I don't know if I'm answering that right. I mean, some of the stuff we knew, like Josh Growers, we know they grow little blue stem all the time. We know they grow Gulf Muly. We know you can get Gulf Muly even if it's not the native one. I mean, the Texas genotype. Tradescantia is, spiderwort's pretty available in the trade. So I sort of knew the things that we either knew we could get, or I knew that somebody has grown, or we could get somebody to grow. And that's just from just different, because all Clark Condon's work is all commercial projects. So, we don't get 5 of something, we get 50 or 500 of something, So I sort of knew, I know the growers, I know the commercial growers, I know what's generally grown, in the trade. So, that's kind of where we started. And so the idea was that, so maybe, 70% of at least, you can probably buy fairly readily. And then also, we also knew that once we sort of created this palette, then we could create a demand. Mm-hmm. And so, some of the local growers, like, Morningstar Prairie Plants, Mike Morgenstern is, he lives out on some property in, where is he? Damon? Is he in Damon?
Yeah, he's down in Damon, but he comes into the city and sells at farmers markets.
Yeah,
and things
he sells
like
at farmers
that.
market, but his nursery's in his backyard. And he's gone in the last 10 years from, a couple of tables to his nursery is his backyard. His backyard is his nursery, and he's got a prairie. He's got, a lot of prairie planted in the rest of his yard. So he's got a seed source there and all that. And then, so I don't know if that answers your question. It's just a matter of, it's kind of, you pick the plants you think are going to be most available. And then once you pick your plants, then you sort of talk to people about trying to grow them.
And also, I mean, another point is all of these are commercially great, available in seed form. So like Beth was saying, like we want structure from the beginning, so it looks like something. You're not wholly dependent on seeds. But for some of these species, seeds are great, depending on when you put them in, right? So you guys know that, like Indian blanket and black-eyed Susan. So some combination of live plants and seeds you're probably gonna do that. Now, Sam, to your point, I'm always thinking about that, like how much can we push the growers, but they need these huge contracts guaranteed. That's usually where the trip up is, right? So what we try to do is go simple, and then maybe have some high profile plantings, educational, outreach, drive a little demand and get those to maybe open it up a little bit, loosen it up a little bit. And like, we can find some of these species like Indian blanket and certainly little blue stem and blue, but you can find these at some local native nurseries as well. So it's not like they're so exotic that you couldn't find them. So anyway, I'd love to do both. Come up with a simplified palette of things you can find, and then push some other really cool stuff. But
well, I think that was part of the point, is that let's start with 9, which I think, again, kudos to your wife, Jaime, because, that's the bottom line is that's a really catchy title, so.
Right.
But I think the thought was, if you get people to sort of learn 9, then they, then you learn, then you learn a little more, and we all have to start somewhere. So I thought is, well, if you start with these, and honestly, if I did this today, if I did this again today, because this is more than 8 years ago we started this. But if I did it again
Wow.
today, there's
Yeah.
probably a couple of different plants I would probably say, oh, let's not do that one.
Mhm.
Let's do this one instead. But I think this was, you know, a great start, you know, at the time. And again, I think you start with 9, and then once you get that going, you know, you come in and, you know, you can plant more. You can always plant more. And some of these we mix, you know, if you look at the designs, we showed them as a mix, like to mix the black-eyed Susan, the bluebonnets, the Indian blanket, the rattlesnake master. You know, that's kind of a mixed planting, because you know you're going to have different bloom times. You know, sometimes they, you know, they'll bloom and then they go down. You know, bluebonnet's not going to be here in the, you know, in the late summer. So that was the purpose of that, is that we actually, you know, use them in combination, sort of in a mix of with other things, versus just like, here's this plant and here's this plant and here's that plant. Whereas in the shade, our recommendation was more like that, you know, that here's this plant, but it's repeated, and then there's that plant and it's repeated. So that just seemed to work better for the species that we selected versus using mixtures.
And I think I'm going to put an exclamation point on something you said. This is kind of a gateway activity, right? People get excited about, you know, this, they get excited about native plants, but if you tell them to, and we sometimes, and I'll put myself in this category early in my career, you say like, rip out all your non-natives and do your whole yard, that's a non-starter. So we said, what, let's get on first base. Let's not grow for the grand slam and strike out altogether, because that happens a lot. Let's get on home base. Let's get them to not only do this 9 natives thing, but through the Native Plant Society of Texas Houston chapter, we also created some signage, not for 9 natives, but for native prairie plantings, so people could know was it a mistake? It's a solution. And so interpret what you plant as well is an important part of it. And so, yeah, this is a gateway activity. Once people get hooked on native plants, you know, it's like stamp collecting. They want more and more and more. So, but we got to get them on first base. So this is really so sometimes people were like, well, this isn't a real prairie. It's like, it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to bring some of that functionality in and introduce people to the concept. So if you want to do a native prairie planting, that is in a related activity, but this is not what this is for, right? Because we can do that in different ways. So Caitlin, you've been waiting for a while. Let's get your question real quick.
I just, thanks for doing this, by the way. This is awesome. I'm glad that we have so many team members together. One thing I feel like, and what kind of inspired me to jump in with this, is trying to communicate between the groups. I'm a master naturalist, but I've also done a talk for the master gardeners. And in my county, which is south of Tarrant County, Johnson County, there's like more disconnect between the communities than say Collin County or Dallas County. So I'm thinking like this would be a great tool to say, hey, check this out, check out this palette. Like you said, it's very accessible. Is that how y'all have used this? Have y'all done that before in Houston?
Yeah, I've been teaching in the Master Naturalist program for 21 years now. And sometimes you see this lack of linkage between the groups that have so much Venn diagram of shared membership, right? So people in Native Plant Society of Texas who also are an MPAT, Master Naturalist and everything. So I think that the goal for me always in conservation is break down the silos, get people to communicate and see their commonalities. So no, I think that this could be a way of bridging some of that, because really we're all trying to do similar things. And whenever you can leverage more groups to do this at one time, you know, and then also let people lean into their talent like Beth, you know, so that we had a team that was composed of different kinds of skill sets.
Yeah, I'm not a native plant. I mean, I'm good. I think I can tell you a paspalum and I can tell you a grama and I can, but I can then necessarily tell you which one it is. You know, I know some, you know, I'm not, you know, if it grows in a pot, I got a pretty good chance of knowing it. But I'm still on a learning curve in terms of all the different natives that are out there. But one of the things I was going to add to something you said a little earlier, Jaime, in terms of natives, is if y'all know Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, he spoke at something last couple of months, and he talked about trying to do like 70% native or 80% native or whatever, and don't, if we try to tell people, oh, you can only grow natives, and try to be, really strong purists, then I think we'll lose some of our audience. But if we try to, and I think in my own garden, I mean, I love plants. I have some plants that aren't native, and I'm, working on increasing the number of natives in my garden, but I'm not giving away my ginger. So I think we have to allow for, we really certainly want to increase the use of natives in the landscape, but if we get too hard-nosed, then I'm afraid we'll lose some of our audience. So, and Doug Talley makes a really good point of that in his book. It's like if y'all haven't read that book, it's a really good read.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that we're trying to be people's friend, not their judge. And when you make this binary decision between all natives good and evil if you have your gardenias, I think that I think we probably lose 90% of potential people at that point. Right. And rightfully so, because we're coming in a very judgmental way. So, I think everybody on this call, Sam and everybody, knows that passion and love of something can win over a lot of fans. And just as soon as they start getting natives, you don't have to worry about it, right? It's going to start taking over. So just try for something actionable instead of going for the whole thing and getting zero. And also making enemies. I've heard people really say, I can't work with native plant people because they're just so restrictive and they don't listen to me. So there's also a sociological point to it. But one thing I would say is, and we haven't done this a lot with non-natives, is that role of interpretation and making sure that people know that what you're doing is purposeful and not an accident. So you saw that in Beth's designs on a median. We always include a very sharp edge around pocket prairies when we can, and native plantings, so it looks like a English garden, not a mistake where the people ran out of lawnmower gas, right? It has to look intentional. So anyway, I'll just say that. And and to Sam's comment about regional specificity and not just planting Texas natives, but actually doing something that's bioregional to your area is super important. Bluebonnets is a good example of that. Like Beth was saying, we made a little bit of an allowance there. Now I have a plant list from 1910 that actually lists that species in Harris County. So, but we fudged it a little bit because people know what a bluebonnet is, and it's a cultural bridge, and it's a little bit of a weed, so the other plants will surround it and outgrow it anyway. So I always put it in every prairie planting I know, because people need a cultural mental bridge until it gets to something else, right? So it's a good ambassadorial plant for that kind of thing. All right, I want to be respectful of people's times. It's 5:01. If you feel comfortable staying on for another 5 minutes or so, if people have any questions.
Yeah, I'm good.
I wanted to ask a question about when you say native or not native. Did you have to address invasive plants at all with people? And how did you say, gosh, that Chinese pistache is just a bad idea and still be nice? I mean,
I come up against that. So we did, in the last few years, one of my swan song was we were the locals for the Eastern Botanic Garden and picked and really did all the planting. We picked the plants. We picked 500 species of plants for the garden, and the committee, which was basically the philanthropic group that were involved in this, had a list of plants they wanted, and a couple of those things on there were invasive. And we just said, look, I understand that you want that plant. I said, but we will not put that on our plan. If you add it later, I can't control that, but we will not put that on our plan. And so that's what I generally tell people, is that I cannot specify a plant that I know is invasive. And we follow not just the Texas invasives, but from as a as a group, we go to the Florida invasive website because we figure
Yeah.
if it's invasive in Florida, it's probably going to creep. And it, you know, it might be invasive in Florida, it might be invasive in Mexico, but Florida has a pretty good invasive species website and data. And so we kind of go, you know, what's the one, the big plant everybody wants right now, marimba. It's a big medicinal plant, marimba. Anyway, but it's everybody wants to grow it. And I just talked to somebody the other day and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's invasive. Don't plant it in your yard. You know, we didn't really come across that here, you know, in terms of talking to people, but I do come across that, you know, in terms of our professionally, you know.
Yeah. And Kim, I'll just add, for this particular program, we weren't telling people what non-natives to not plant. We were just telling people, here's a good selection of natives. Now, that being said, and we're learning this iteratively, is that we had to do quality control internally to our natives list because there were some species that were invasive natives that would take over, like Beth was saying, right?
Yeah,
so
and that
whether
would be
something's invasive, yeah, like the scarlet sage, for instance, a little bit invasive.
Well, it would be considered aggressive, not invasive, right? Because invasive means it's not native, right?
Right.
There's a lot of discussion on those two terms, but yeah, then that's what, yeah,
Yeah.
that's like the wood fern. The wood fern can be really aggressive.
Oh, very aggressive.
Yeah. Hey, sweetie. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think I got it. I got an egg. Okay, close the door. Thank you. Sorry. My granddaughters. So yeah. And if you're on the Michael Eason's website on his Facebook page. Did I lose you?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, if you use Michael, if you ever go on Michael on the website, the Texas Natives website that Michael Eason and Aaron, what's his name, admin, they talk a lot about invasives versus aggressive.
And people do confuse those two, like non-native versus native and invasive versus not invasive. Those are two, you know, like, and this is something to know in your non-natives thing. Is like, you're going to put it down on paper and you're going to select the species, then you're going to make the plantings, right? Just like all gardening and landscape architecture, you're going to see how it works. And there might be some species you want to sub out, right? So we've had some issues with scarlet sage being aggressive. As you know, blue mist flower can be aggressive. So that's part of the reason that you need some designs that have lots of structure so it just doesn't run over the whole thing. But you also may need to sub out some species as well. So have that kind of in the back of your mind that this is a learning process as well as a methodology. All right, well, we are at time, 5:05. I think you guys know where to find us. But
I have a question real quick too.
Sure.
So we've been introduced and we've been introduced to the concept, and at some point in time, I know we need to invite other people to the table for production and all of that kind of thing. What do you suggest? Where do you suggest we start? I mean, you guys did the design contest. I guess if we did that, that would generate buzz about the project. But as I look at your 9 natives, I see many that are our 9, you know, some of our natives as well.
Sure, they're yours.
So I don't know whether we should replicate the whole process or try to streamline it more in a different way. So I guess my question is, what do you suggest we do going forward? I mean, we've got a kind of a basis of a committee here.
Well, I
what
guess
should we do next?
The piece of advice that I would give you is, and this is why it was critical to have Beth on the team for a number of reasons. But one thing that she really helped sharpen is that people who oftentimes plant natives or advocate for natives aren't sometimes thinking about it through that designer's lens, which is, let's really look at it in terms of these characteristics. So I think the rubric was really good in helping people to focus and helping the people who are coming up with the 9 natives list to really keep it real. And what I mean by that is people could get very fanciful with their designs and get kind of out of step with the reality of plant sources and structure and things like that. So what the design contest did is it actually encouraged design thinking to say, if you want things that are actionable, it has to be within certain constraints that are practical. And so I like the design contest. So if you don't do a design contest and you just have a committee, I think that there's some real value to putting it through those filters and any other filters that you say, so that you get something that is actionable and durable, as opposed to just a bunch of species that are put together. Because if you just put a bunch of species together, they might not hang well structurally, color-wise, or otherwise. So I don't know if Beth has anything to add to that, but it gave us some clarity of purpose, and like it really honed our ability to think about the design challenge.
All right, that makes a lot of sense.
Are you all, is
Right.
everybody on here kind of from the same area? Are y'all from different areas? Or I don't really quite know who all of you are.
Basically Fort Worth, but I mean,
Right.
eventually this could spread to Dallas as well, which would have some differences because their soil's different.
Different soil types, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you, I'm going to be pretty tied up between now and Christmas, but after the new year, if y'all start doing this and you need help sort of putting things together, I mean, you can, give me a call. I'll see what I can do to help you. But I think, narrowing down to that 9 natives is your first step, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
Sam has
comment,
a good point.
right. It's a complex, right? So it's, I don't think there's enough variability in the plant communities for commonly available species that you should really be thinking them as two contexts. And it might be easier that way. And I would say from the beginning, we invited a whole bunch of different groups, the Master Naturalists, NPAT, CPP, Katy Prairie. So probably thinking intentionally about what is that overlap of these groups that would share this out and have that pride of authorship is really important at the beginning, because those are going to be the folks that get it out. So it just comes out of NPAT, the Fort Worth chapter, well, that's their product. But if it comes out of 3 or 4
Right.
different organizations, then they're all going to push it. And it also looks better, right? So when
Yes.
people read it, they're like, we got buy-in from all these groups. So, and then the last piece is you're going to have, and this will happen because it happened with us. At the end of your process, people are going to say, who owns this? Because groups always want to own stuff, right? But this is where you have to be upfront about a memorandum of understanding that you're going to jointly create this, but nobody owns the 9 natives concept.
Right.
Because once you monopolize it, as soon as that group loses funding for that initiative, it dies. And so the whole reason for this was remix it and do it, but nobody owns it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I want all of the people at the table anyway, because that's how it's going to be successful. You know, we have a great resource connection that grows plants. That is our Master Gardener program, and it's on a prairie, and there's seeds available. So we have lots of things that can make that happen. We haven't really connected with the Master Gardener program, which does have that Master Naturalist piece into it, or there are a lot of people in the Master Gardener program who focus on natives. So that's why Hester's here. Hester has a lot to do with the Master Gardeners. So I think if we get that buy-in from everybody, then that makes it much more palatable for everybody to do. And if we can get the botanic gardens and our producers making it, then we'll have places to get the plants.
Yeah, and if you have well-established garden clubs, so a lot of our garden clubs in Houston, River Oaks and Garden Club of Houston, they have lots of resources and lots of influence. And that's why Garden Club has been really, and I'm an honorary member of the Garden Club, but they have been really good at having in there because they have a different audience. They have a different levers of influence. So if you have a well-established garden club that's doing conservation or looking to move towards conservation, I would definitely include them.
Okay. Yeah, we do have some garden clubs within the Fort Worth. And if we move this to Dallas as well, which it sounds like we should, we need some more input from Dallas people.
Well, and
So-
maybe you have one sort of 9 natives, but then you have, in those alternate plants, then you might say, you might have a couple of plants. Maybe there's a couple of species that grow really well on the west side of Dallas or east side of Dallas that don't grow on the west side of Fort Worth. And maybe there's a little bit of flexibility in this. So you don't have you don't have a 9 natives for Dallas and 9 natives for Fort Worth, but you have some flexibility in there to say,
Right.
to say, okay, here's some exceptions, great plants if you live on the west side or and not the east or whatever. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. We're going to have to get some Dallas people involved, because right now I think just about everybody here is Fort Worth, I believe. But I wanted to get us started, and then using our influence with other organizations, we can invite more people. to get
Well,
involved.
and the only thing about Dallas is if they create a 9 natives plan, it can't be better than Houston's. The only restriction.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
Don't
Jaime,
be
you're
talking
just
to the Fort Worth person like this.
you're just
I'm-
worried about the City Nature Challenge. I know you.
Oh yeah, always thinking about it. We just had our first organizational meeting. Super excited. We got coral reefs now. So anyway, yeah, yeah, we got the flower garden banks. I'm so excited about that. We're gonna have sharks. But so thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome. You guys are doing great work up there. We're excited about the potential for seeing what your plans could be and uplifting that too. We will get this recording out along with other materials out to all the NPAT chapters, and we'll try to get it out to Central NIPSOT as well, and the Master Naturalists, so that people can see this and if they have questions about 9 natives. So it might be that we're all getting dragged into something. It's hilarious. Into something bigger, and maybe it'll spread across the state. That was the hope. And I got to tell you, I have to really kind of uplift Beth Clark and Lan Shen for being like awesome during this whole process, for Katy Prairie Conservancy really kind of fueling a lot of things, and just a lot of different groups coming to the table. So if you guys have questions or concerns, just reach out to me or Beth. We're going to be a little bit more available after the holidays, but you guys get some time to talk and just push forward with it. We're excited about it.
We are
I'm gonna
too.
put my email address in there. So
Jamie, I have one further question. How have you kept all of the different groups involved? Do you send out a regular announcement to everybody involved, or do you have a flyer? What is your means of communicating between
with something like this, the prairie community, we worked very intentionally to have a lot of cohesion with the prairie group. So that was the whole purpose of the Coastal Prairie Partnership and other things, is to work together more closely. So that really, really helped, because we were already kind of socially cohering. As far as the other groups are concerned, this is one of those open source concepts where you take it, you mix it, you go do what you need to do. So we don't have a regular meetup time or something like that, but we always kind of have it in our back pocket to tell people about.
you might also mention the Prairie Stampede, Jaime.
Yeah, so one of the things that when we created the partnership in 2009, we decided that if we were going to be better working together, we would have to have some joint work that was meaningful. So we had a bunch of conferences, we had a bunch of trainings, we have educational, a joint educational website, but we also needed social events. What we're doing is we're meeting with strangers in rooms and asking them for favors. That doesn't work long term, and that's how a lot of nonprofit work gets done. You want to help me? I have something for me to do in my organization. Don't you want to help me? Well, that'll only get you so far. And so what we decided to do is to say, let's lean in even when people aren't rushing to do a grant, right? So one of the things we decided early on is we needed to uplift our prairie champions, and we needed to celebrate each other at the end of the year. So we put together something called Prairie Stampede. So we meet every December, at the beginning of December. We have a holiday party with all the different groups. Everybody can tell us what they accomplished for the prairie, whether it's a teacher or a wildlife biologist or whoever. And then we can talk about next year, what are we going to do and how are we going to help each other? So I was talking we's, and a lot of people are like, who's the we? I'm like, well, it depends on the coalition I'm in. But network weaving is super critical. I'm actually working on a network map for the coastal prairie community here so that everybody can see, like, you are an army. These are the people next to you, right? So it's about really breaking down this siloed approach to conservation and to environmental action to recognize that we're a system. And if somebody's weak in the system, even though I'm wearing this logo, I'm weak. And that really is a paradigm that really needs to set in, because we're solving systems problems, and that deserves system approaches. And so anyway, I'm going to let everybody go because I got to pick up my 7-year-old from grandma's house. You guys are awesome. Sam, keep doing
Thank
great
you.
work up there until you get to the City Nature Challenge and then get the flu. But other than that, you guys are awesome, and we appreciate your time.
Thank
All
you
right.
so
Bye.
much.
All right.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.